Jason Licht could be looking to make a draft day move. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Taking a look at another potential reunion in Tampa, and a Bucs legend speaks about one of his favorite players in the 2024 NFL draft. We are going to start with Buccaneers GM's recent comments about the first round. Jason Licht was recently on the Rich Eisen Show, say that 3 times fast, talking about making draft day trades, and said there were, quote, 1 or 2 trade up targets, end quote, for the Bucs in this year's draft. Now, Licht generally has moved down in the first round, if he moves at all, but moved up in 2020 to secure Tristan Wirfs, which ended up being one of the best moves that he has ever made. But who would he be looking to move up for in this year's draft? I would think that he wouldn't be moving into the teens because of the cost associated, but maybe moving up around 4 to 6 spots to, between 20 and 24, somewhere in that range, should they see a guy that they covet begin to slide. So I took a look at the Jimmy Johnson draft pick trade chart, and the cost of moving from 26 to 20, which to me seems kind of like the ceiling of where they would probably move, it would cost 175 points. So, translated, that means that it would cost the Bucs pick 89 plus either a future pick, or maybe you're doing a late round swap where the Bucs are giving up 89 and 125 in exchange for the Steelers' 5th round pick, as well as pick 20. But you're talking at the very least, the Bucs losing one of their 4 top 100 picks, which I talked a lot about that on yesterday's episode and how important those picks are. So what players would be worth losing a potential starter, or at the very least a contributor that they could find in the 3rd round? And I'm going to start with edge rusher Laiatu Latu. For whatever reason, Latu is beginning to slide in some of these mock drafts and from some of these draft analysts. And I go back to the medicals being a little on the concerning side. But Latu's impact would not only be instant, but you would hope, outside of the medicals being a concern, you would hope that this is long lasting, right? We're talking about one of the premier players at arguably the Bucs' top position of need, and they would go and do whatever they could to ensure that he became a Buccaneer. But I also look to the other major position of need in the interior offensive line, and I think about Graham Barton. As Latu's stock has begun to slide a little bit, Barton's seems to be rising. He is an instant plug-and-play starter in between Robert Hainsey and Tristan Wirfs, another long-term solution to a problem that the Bucs really have had since losing Ali Marpet to retirement. And Jason Licht may feel that he's willing to give up some capital this year to get a guy that he knows is going to be around for the next 6, 7, 8, 9 years to help anchor the offensive line, while also obviously a result of bringing him in would be improving the league's worst rushing attack from last season. So those are the 2 guys that I immediately gravitated towards. When he said one or two trade up targets, those were the two guys that popped in my mind. But there are a few wild cards that I would like to throw out because, these are quote unquote one or two guys that Jason Licht is willing to move up for. And we really have no idea what he is truly looking for. He and Todd Bowles know what they want in their team. And, those Latu and Barton are the guys that I would move up for. But here are some other names that potentially Jason Licht would be looking to land. And a guy that I've talked about a couple of times now over the past couple of episodes is defensive tackle Jer'Zhan Newton. And I've mentioned him over the last week because I can't imagine a better upgrade for the Bucs defensive line to plug him in over Logan Hall than the consensus top tackle in the NFL draft. He would fit beautifully next to Vita Vea. That would help the pass rush in a big, big way. You cannot double every player across the Bucs defensive line. You can't double team Newton, and double team Vita Vea, and double team Kalijah Kancey. Vea is going to get the double teams. So now you have Kalijah Kancey and Jer'Zhan Newton getting one-on-one opportunities on top of Randy Gregory, Yaya Diaby, JTS, Marquise Watts, Jose Ramirez coming in off the edge. You know that at some point you're going to have Levante David and KJ Britt or Servassier Dennis coming in on blitzes. You're going to have Winfield Jr. You're going to have Christian Izien coming in on blitzes. The Bucs could make life very, very difficult for opposing offensive lines if you add a guy with the abilities of Newton. You're talking about arguably the best three-man front in all of football with the addition of Newton. So that's a guy I could see if he starts slipping into the late teens, Jason Licht is going to be picking up the phone and making calls, trying to get up there and get him, because that's really two birds, one stone, right? You need the edge rusher, but if you add Newton, that immediately makes your edge rushers even better. The pass rush getting better immediately makes your secondary better. It's a domino effect, and I think that would be an incredible addition. Next is Quinion Mitchell, and he's a cornerback out of Toledo that I've not talked about a lot because a lot of people believe he's going to be the first corner off the board taken well before the Bucs are even on the clock. He forced more incompletions than any other corner in college football over the last two seasons. He could be a game changer for Todd Bowles and his defensive scheme. One of the more unlikely candidates, but if for some reason he starts to slide a little bit, the Buccaneers could absolutely pounce on a game-changing corner like that. I also have to consider both Jackson Powers-Johnson and Jared Verse as trade-up candidates for the same reasons that I talked about with Graham Barton and Leatu Latu. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Powers-Johnson and Verse. You guys understand it. You know exactly why they would be trade-up candidates. But finally, I'm going to throw out a wild card of someone that I have not mentioned on the show at all, but the Bucs could go big on offense if Brian Thomas Jr. falls in range for the Bucs. 6'4", 200 pounds. He's coming off of a nearly 1,200-yard season where he had 17 touchdown catches. Johnson is the exact player that the Bucs need at wide receiver 3 to play the outside and then potentially become wide receiver 2 if Chris Godwin leaves as a free agent. If Godwin sticks around, the Bucs might end up being the only team in the NFL with a wide receiver trio that can compete with Houston's wide receiver trio. At the end of the day, if there's only one or two players that Jason Licht is truly moving or willing to move up for, the likelihood that it happens is slim. They would have to fall in a range that wouldn't cost the Buccaneers a fortune to go up and get, and it would have to be a marquee level player that would really change what they do on that side of the football, whoever the player is. It's interesting to think about which prospects the Bucs and Jason Licht covet enough to do that. But I think if you really break it down and take a look at it, it's pretty easy to decipher which of these big names that are probably being projected in that 10 to 20 range, that if they slip to that 20 to 24 range, Jason Licht would move up and pounce on. But could the Buccaneers be setting up for another reunion That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It can be easy to ignore our social battery and spread ourselves thin, especially with social gatherings picking up after the winter. I know for me, between my day job, the podcast, and traveling every weekend due to my son's schedule, I find myself drained faster and faster every day, but still having to push through in all situations, telling myself it's for the greater good, regardless of how I feel in the moment, often ignoring my own needs in service of others. Speaking to someone on the outside without a personal bias in my day-to-day life can be extremely beneficial and help me reshuffle what I view as a priority versus what should actually be a priority. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Every dayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow. Plenty more to discuss. No Evan this week. Full disclosure, I am recording this episode on Sunday. I forewarned you guys on the live episode that my son's hockey tryout schedule is basically taking every day this week and into next week, so I have to get these episodes done when I can. Have no worries. If there's major breaking news or anything of significance, I will come to you with a bonus episode to make sure that I bring you the latest on the Buccaneers. In the meantime, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your television all day? Do you have to turn down the volume from all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Over the weekend, former Tampa Bay Buccaneer and Atlanta Falcon wide receiver Scotty Miller posted on Instagram a picture of himself and Buccaneers quarterback Baker Mayfield working out together, which was more than just a little interesting. For starters, not really sure where the connection between the two would come from. They've never played with one another in the NFL or in college. So why exactly would they link up to work out together? Well, that's what has speculation starting to ramp up, that maybe there's another reunion in the works for the Buccaneers, bringing back a former member of that Super Bowl 55 team. Miller had one of the biggest catches in Buccaneers history with his touchdown right before halftime of the NFC Championship game in Lambeau against the Green Bay Packers, but he saw his production and usage fall the following two seasons as he dealt with some injury issues and just really not being able to get on the field all that often. Last year, Miller moved on to play for division rival Atlanta, where he had just 16 targets and 11 receptions for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, Miller is still a free agent looking for a place to play next season. Here's the thing. I love Scotty Miller. You all love Scotty Miller. Bucs fans will always love Scotty Miller because he is going to forever hold a special place in their hearts, but he does not help fix the Bucs problem at wide receiver. He is not the big outside threat that can win 50-50 balls. He is not a guy that can develop into wide receiver 2 if Chris Godwin leaves. He is not a guy that is going to open things up because of the attention that he requires from the opposing defense. He is essentially a deep threat and a potential return guy. The Bucs already have that. They have Trey Palmer. They have Devin Tompkins. He would be just another situational player that the Bucs don't really need. Maybe they see some of these players differently, but we're talking between Miller, Palmer, and Tompkins, 3 receivers that are under 6 foot and aren't great at getting release against press man coverage. None of these players are guys that fill the need that the Bucs have at wide receiver. So as much as we all love Scotty Miller, he would be a third receiver that's essentially the same as 2 guys already on the roster. As I said on Friday's show, I don't love the free agent options still floating out there for the Bucs to sign as a wide receiver 3, that outside wide receiver role as Chris Godwin goes back into the slot. You got Allen Robinson, DJ Chark, Michael Gallup, Equanimous St. Brown. Those are the kind of really the only cheap options left for the Buccaneers that legitimately fill the need that they have. But any of those would be a Band-Aid. None of those are a real solution, which brings us back to addressing it in the draft. The Bucs could pay up for Tyler Boyd, who is still going to get more than what the Bucs are probably willing to offer a free agent wide receiver at this point, because you can get one in the draft on day 2 for a lot cheaper than Tyler Boyd is going to cost. And I think Boyd is kind of stuck in limbo right now, waiting to see if the Bengals trade T. Higgins like he requested, since he's on that franchise tag, and then Boyd is going to go back to Cincinnati and be the wide receiver 2 there opposite Jamar Chase. If that's not what he's waiting on, I'm shocked he's still available, truly. But I think he is just holding off to see if T. Higgins is maybe one of those draft weekend trades like we saw with A.J. Brown a few years ago, and he likely ends up back with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase in the Cincinnati Bengals. But even if he's not, I don't see the Buccaneers paying Mike Evans and Chris Godwin both over $20 million a year, plus bringing in Boyd, who's going to cost you close to 10. You can get a Tyler Boyd on day 2 of the NFL draft this year. You can get someone better than Tyler Boyd on day 2 of the NFL draft this year, and he's not going to cost you what Tyler Boyd will. So as much as people would love to get excited about the idea of Scooter coming back to the Bucs, if you break it down based on what they have, what they need, what they're trying to do offensively, it just doesn't make a lot of sense with the way that the roster is currently constructed. I wish it did. I wish Scotty Miller could come back and contribute, because again, he's a fun person to be around. He's a fun person to talk to. He makes highlight reel level plays. He is a deep threat. But I go back to the conversations that I've had with you guys about running backs and Rachaad White and Chase Edmonds. You have to find someone that brings you a skill set that you don't already have. And the Bucs have Scotty Miller's skill set in Trey Palmer and Devin Tompkins. So bringing in Scotty Miller essentially is just repeating last year's wide receiver group. You know, yeah, they lost David Moore to the Carolina Panthers, but Scotty Miller, Trey Palmer, Devin Tompkins, they're interchangeable on any given play. And Scotty Miller may be faster than Palmer or Tompkins, but again, he doesn't offer anything that the Bucs don't already have at wide receiver. I would rather have the Bucs spend a top 100 pick on Adonai Mitchell or Keon Cole or Brian Thomas Jr., who I just talked about, or Devontae Walker from North Carolina, one of these big guys that can win the 50-50 jump ball. Johnny Wilson, who we have talked about out of Florida State, who's 6'7". Those guys bring something that the Bucs don't already have, and they bring what the Bucs actually need at wide receiver. Scotty Miller doesn't do that. He's a fan favorite. He's a player that Bucs fans will forever look back on fondly, of. He was always, fun to hear talk, fun to interact with, fun to watch. But if the Bucs bring in Scotty Miller, I have serious questions as to why. What is it about Scotty Miller that you feel you didn't already have on the roster? And why would you believe, what do you believe he is going to bring to Baker Mayfield and the offense that they don't have on the roster right now. So as excited as people may have gotten about it over the weekend, I just do not see it happening. Now, there is a Buccaneers legend who unveils some of his favorite draft prospects. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With Game Time's last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off when buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, or theater near you. I love the all-in pricing, so there's no shock when I get to check out. What I see is what I pay. Then, when I get to check out, nothing makes it easier than being able to use Apple Pay. It takes me absolutely no time at all from the moment I pick my seats to the moment I have them right there on my phone. And with their lowest price guarantee, if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Wrapping things up here on a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. Buccaneers legend and Pro Football Hall of Fame corner Ronde Barber recently spoke about his favorite draft prospects and had this to say regarding someone who has been linked to the Bucs a couple of times through the draft process there at pick number 26. Quote, Kool-Aid McKinstry is an ideal prospect for the position because, look, he's going to be an immediate contributor. He's clearly talented. He has admirable movement, and he's very consistent with it. The one thing that scares me, he is not a very good tackler. Other than that, some things that stand out about Kool-Aid, he's very good at the line of scrimmage with his feet, so he can play man coverage, end quote. McKinstry checks off the typical Todd Bowles checklist for a corner. He's tall, good arm length, good speed, impressive vertical. McKinstry is a prototypical corner and would immediately compete for a starting job with the Buccaneers. Although I feel McCollum did enough to be a starter this season, Bowles also mentioned him as one of his chess pieces this season, which is important to remember. Bowles may want to find a replacement for Carlton Davis and allow Zion McCollum to move freely all over the field to maximize his skill set, which is why on yesterday's episode, I mentioned that do not be shocked if the Buccaneers use one of those top 100 picks on a corner. They may even go corner in the first round, depending on how things fall. And if that trade target for Jason Licht isn't there and he stays at 26, maybe even moves back a little bit and acquires an additional pick, or maybe Kool-Aid McKinstry is one of those trade-up targets that the Bucs really, really love. You also have to remember the Barber's still in the building at One Buc Place, and he may have a little bit of influence on some things, or at the very least, he has an opinion on things that those in the position to make these kinds of decisions would respect and value during this process. It is not by any means crazy to think that if the Bucs are looking to draft a corner, that Bowles and Licht might, talk to Ronde about it a little bit and get his opinion on if he sees the same things in the evaluation process that they are seeing. If they're looking at this prospect in the same way and how he would fit in with the Buccaneers secondary and how he would fit in Todd Bowles' scheme. I'm not saying that they let Ronde make the decision, but they're going to value his opinion just like they value Bruce Arians' opinion, just like they value current players' opinions on certain matters. As I talked about on yesterday's show, cornerback is in that running for that top 100 pick. And when Jason Licht is saying that there's one or two guys that he's willing to move up for, a big shutdown corner should be a position that doesn't get dismissed being a first-round target. Maybe it's not Kool-Aid. Maybe it's Cooper DeJean. I know I saw some people in the comment section saying that they heard, I believe it was Ian Beckles, talking about Cooper DeJean, and he's not a fan. He sees things one way. If the Bucs see it another, then that's what they see. What I don't want to see is the Bucs target a corner that doesn't make any sense, like they did with Vernon Hargreaves. I was very anti that pick. I said in the pre-draft process, I didn't want them taking Vernon Hargreaves. I said after they drafted him that I thought it was a bad pick. Turned out that that was the right opinion. Vernon Hargreaves never panned out, never played well, and I didn't understand drafting a corner that small in a division where all the receivers were as big as they were. That was a time where you had prime Julio Jones. You had Michael Thomas. You had, a big Kelvin Benjamin before he, faced himself out of the league. You had all these big, tall receivers. Kool-Aid McKinstry, Cooper DeJean, Quinion Mitchell. These are all big, athletic, fast corners with high verticals, with long arms that can defend against anybody. And I go back to what I said on yesterday's show about bringing in a corner like that. If you bring in a Kool-Aid McKinstry, you get him up to speed on the defense. You don't, even though Ronde says he'll make an immediate impact, that doesn't mean that he's going to make an impact in week one. It means that by mid to late season, you could potentially have a starting corner opposite Zion McCollum or Jamel Dean, depending on if Jamel Dean gets back on track. But you have a guy that can sit back, can learn, go through some growing pains on the field, and then hopefully you see that big jump from rookie year to sophomore year in his development when he is a locked and loaded starter moving forward. McKinstry's that dude. Mitchell is that dude. People are split on Cooper DeJean. Maybe that's why all of a sudden he's starting to slide down the board and could be available for the Bucs at pick 26. But Ronde Barber has the ears of some of the people in power over at One Buck, and they're going to ask his opinion on players. They're going to ask what he thinks of certain guys, how he evaluates certain guys, to see if everyone is seeing the same thing, or to see if maybe Ronde sees something good or bad that they don't. And they are going to take that criticism or that praise very seriously from a Hall of Fame player in the building that played the position. So, thought it was interesting that he pointed out Kool-Aid McKinstry. I like Kool-Aid a lot. I don't know if I would go with him in the first round, but again, I've prioritized positions that I feel are more important. We'll see what the Buccaneers think, but we still have plenty of draft and prospects to talk about coming up later this week. That is going to do it for this episode. Please check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Follow on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get them. Please subscribe and turn those alerts on so you know every time a new episode is dropping. On YouTube, you'll know exactly when I am going live. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Join subtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.